Okay, everyone, hello. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about our final project process, which we are going to be beginning on in the next weeks here. There is going to be a number of steps to the process. Um, so today is mainly just to kind of give you an overview of what the whole idea of our final project is. Um, So you see on the screen here a few different examples of pieces people have made for final projects. And one thing I think you'll notice is that they are very different. They are each very unique individual pieces. So the first idea of our final project is going to be the idea that it's really open-ended, up to you what you want your piece to be like. Um, and I tend to think of it as a poster. Oftentimes, people do an image that either represents their favorite movie or something, or book, or sometimes a cause that people believe in. Um, I tend to refer to it as a poster, though it might be more of an album cover, or it might be a sort of just a painting with a word in it. That it's a kind of up to you how you think about it. But the main point of it being that it is an extremely open-ended piece that features ideas that we've talked about throughout the semester, um, and that just shows a lot of careful development and thought and um, individualized work. We will be corresponding back and forth a lot about these. Um, and the advice I'm going to have for each of you is going to be highly dependent on the specific sorts of things that you're trying to do in your piece. Um, so basically, we're trying to create a piece that is uh, is quite open-ended, but that brings the rigorous approaches of design and color and careful craftspersonship to bear that we have been developing all semester long. Um, so I'm going to flip over to the assignment sheet here. We'll talk a little bit about some elements of that. For the final assignment, you'll make a rich, exciting, ambitious design using acrylic paint. Show off what you've learned and use the design concepts in your own way. It could be a poster for your favorite band, a movie you love, a cause you believe in, or anything else. You have a lot of freedom as to what the piece is like as long as you do the following. So you must make a rich, dynamic design, um, and it should be thoughtful, complex, but unified. I think that's one thing to highlight there. I say complex but unified. It should not seem like a chaotic form of complexity, but a thoughtful, well constructed version of complexity. It'll fill a sheet of Bristol. Doesn't need to have borders necessarily. Or although you could do a very thin border if you wanted to, a half inch or a quarter inch. If you happen to have larger Bristol paper, it can be larger. Normally, when I do this assignment, when I'm in person, we do it on larger paper and I give you folders, but we're not doing that. We're just doing it the size of our paper unless you happen to have larger paper that you want to do it on. You're going to develop an interesting compositional structure, going all the way back to that idea of how you put together a piece being called composition. It could be spiral, all over, diagonal, pyramid, grid-based, symmetrical, whatever you want, as long as that you've given some good thought to what that composition is like. It's going to incorporate text in an interesting way. So words. I tend to find that it is good to use words in these pieces because that kind of helps anchor the ideas of the piece. Plus, we've done some work with text this semester, and it just gives a good opportunity to uh, get into some good design thinking as you integrate your whatever words you might use with the overall picture. And it says use at least two of the following in an exciting, uh, dramatic way. So I've listed polygonal shape versus organic shape, positive negative ambiguity, um, posterization or something similar, deep space, light, or pattern. And this is not a complete list of all different topics we've talked about this semester, but it gives a nice menu of different things to think about. Again, I really intend for this to be open-ended, and the truth is, if you are putting a lot of care and thought into designing your piece, you are going to involve concepts from our semester, basically inevitably. But it's good to list these ideas as possible things to be thinking about as you're developing your piece. Okay. I'm not going to go into too much depth on color. The color is quite open-ended as long as a few principles are going to be followed. It should be painted with flat, opaque colors. So as always in our assignments, we're focusing on completely mixed, thoroughly mixed, opaque colors to construct our designs, shapes of color. And we're going to be aiming for perfect painting technique in these, really trying to push ourselves in terms of how precise we can make these pieces. As with other pieces, it should avoid reliance on thin lines. Remember, it's basically being constructed in terms of shapes of color. And in terms of the specific colors you use, there's nothing that I'm telling you that it has to do specifically in terms of color, except that it should be thoughtfully colored, that you should be able to sort of say things using intelligent language about the color palette you developed for it and why. You might use color, you might come up with a very specific color palette, like an analogous hue palette or a complementary hue palette. You might use the color to create a sense of illumination or atmospheric perspective, like we are doing in our deep space pieces. So it's really open-ended. It's really meant to be a wide range of possibilities. There are a few general things that I'll say. Of course, you're going to want to be thinking very intensively about your value relationships, your light and dark relationships. Everything can really end up hinging upon what's light and what's dark in a picture, and why. So that would be something to be giving a lot of thought to. You're going to think about how you can use color to direct our attention to focal areas. We think back to our collage we did where we used hues that were different than everything else in the picture to draw attention to certain hotspots. A good rule of thumb, especially when you're doing a design that's a little bit on the complex side in terms of a lot of different stuff going on, because this is our final piece, limiting the number of hues to a small number. Now remember, hues is different than colors, right? Your piece may have 100 different individual mixtures in it, 100 different individual colors, but in terms of how many hues, that is, the pure hues, the reds, your blues, it's good to limit those. So a good rule of thumb in design often is to limit your number of hues to 3. You could have many different versions of blue, many different versions of red, many different versions of green, or something like that, but you wouldn't want to have necessarily all different hues in a riot of color across your piece, because that usually looks like a mess. A rainbow effect almost always looks like a mess. So limiting your hue palette. And consider using lower intensity colors alongside higher intensities. We now know really well how to mix, so use your mixing savvy to create a variety of mixtures. The other thing to say is this is a process that's going to be extended over a number of weeks. As usual, don't rush ahead. I'd rather you take it slow, really give a lot of thought, we'll go back and forth a lot, we'll communicate a lot, and we'll do this piece deliberately, thoughtfully, and slowly. I've made a little adjustment here to the slide schedule, so this slightly disagrees with that previous schedule that I sent you a while ago in some of the later weeks. I'll make that change on Blackboard, and I'll, of course, be reminding you as we go. But the first date is April 29th. That is the day to send me the pictures of your first drafts of your project. So you should do a general brainstorming, maybe a couple of pages of just a lot of different doodling, sketching, listing out words, little very, very rough little bits of ideas, and then at least one fairly fully developed sketch at perhaps half the final size. Basically, your kind of rough draft stage of developing an idea. So you're going to submit that. You're going to also watch a video on that day of me explaining a color study, a very quick little study that I'd like you to do for your piece um, to get ready to tackle the color palette. You'll learn some interesting things in the process of making that color study. And then on the 6th, a week later, send the final full-scale polished pencil drawing for the project, and also submit that little color study that I will have asked you to do. And then by the following week, send an image of the design about half painted. We'll talk more specifically about that on an individual basis as you're developing your pieces. And then the following week, an image of the design completed. So a good bit of time, really stretching this out, but I want the results to reflect that, to really show that development. Okay, we'll go back over schedule stuff, all these different parts much more later, but that's the sort of overview. What I'd like to do now is just talk in a little more specific terms about individual designs, individual pieces that people have done, and talk about some of the good thinking that I think is involved that will hopefully be inspiring in a way. So I just have a variety of different examples here. This is a great one by a student that it's based on a real movie, based on a real character. It takes a lot of inspiration from specific imagery from the movie that it's based on, but it is an individual, unique image that is it's not copied at all from the original, but it is very much inspired by the original very strongly. A lot of great decisions going on here. Wonderful use of organic shape, all these wonderful smooth shapes, and then these bubbly forms. The simplicity of the color palette, I think, is really effective, that it's all blue with just a splash of red, again using the color relationships to create a focal zone here. A nice composition. It would have been easy to put this figure in the center, but it's nice to have the figure off in the corner, so we have a kind of diagonal relationship between the mouth and the character here. And you could make different arguments about what the best way is to describe this compositional setup, but definitely a thoughtful arrangement of these forms within the design. Thoughtful use of light. You can see some insights from the deep space painting going on here, and the posterization painting too, in terms of the different lightness levels going on that suggest light. And yeah, really delightful piece that really does explore a lot of the things that we did in this semester. Definitely there's some thin lines here. These lines that we made a call that it was okay for her to do those. These lines are actually made with a paint marker, which is why they're so insanely precise. So that was a little bit of a rule bending that went on there, but definitely this piece does a lot with shapes of color. So having these line elements for the bubbles seemed fine to me in that instance. Here's another piece. Now, again, based on something that in real, obviously, in popular culture. I'm reading the Harry Potter books to my son right now, so it's quite a journey we're on. But a really amazing, impressive piece in terms of painting technique. All these little edges, and these is all painted. Thin brush, face sideways. Very intricate piece of work there for sure. So definitely, and obviously I'm showing you guys some really stellar examples. These are not your average piece with these, I would say. These are well above average examples that I'm showing you. So bear that in mind. But again, really nice, even though it has this line emphasis, all these black lines. In this case, because it was the idea of the stained glass, I thought it was appropriate that they would have those thin lines. That it didn't seem to me to be a problem. It was part of the effect that made it work, and definitely a lot of light and dark awareness happening through the way the different shadows are working. The lovely effect I love in the buildings too, the gentle relationship between that gray and this light. There's a kind of fogginess that the buildings take on that shows a little bit of of something similar to the atmospheric effect that we are getting in our distant objects on our deep space paintings. Um, and, obviously its composition is sort of maybe sort of pyramidy, it's kind of a central composition, but definitely makes sense based upon the content and the idea of presenting this character like in this sort of saintly way in this Gothic window. We've got another piece here based on something real, a cool diagonal composition going on. Some neat choices in terms of the simplifications of certain things. You had these complicated characters, but this decision to kind of blank out the faces was A, obviously made things easier, but B, also creates an interesting sort of effect, right? They almost become kind of yin and yang type of characters to me. And lots of great decisions again with the composition, with specific things about how the like the way this sorry, I have to move this. Like the way these different elements weave through this circle, and again, not just limited to 3 hues. Definitely, there are more hues here, but I think it avoids that kind of chaotic look because there seems to be a real intention to the way that all these colors in the lower left, the Kansas colors, are all this pretty low intensity colors, brownish colors, and the way these tend to be more green, cool, high intensity. Plenty of good decisions made through there. Another design that takes something real, takes inspiration from the real thing, but created its own version of this is not the real Coraline logo. This person actually typed it on the computer and printed it out and used that as a template to create this lettering through tracing. So there's, if you want to use the computer at all to print anything out. Again, though, avoiding copying the actual logos of things. If you're going to have a thing that has a logo, make your own version of the logo. Don't just copy the one that already exists. Really neat way of suggesting the light here, this moonlight. Very, very nice work here, and some interesting ideas in terms of simplifying the character in this kind of polygonal way. Plenty to admire there. Here's another one from a student who was a fan of Burton snowboards. And this isn't exactly what the posterization effect was. Certainly, this is this kind of faceted, sort of jewel-like, kind of like carving approach of this face and these mountains. But definitely takes some of those lessons from the posterized face to heart, I think, because it has these light and dark fragments that together kind of create the sense of the three-dimensional kind of surface of the face. So a few examples of a few different things, a few different approaches to the piece. In all cases, it's really a matter of finding a design that you really are interested in digging into and really finding the complexities of and really getting right. Really making a piece that is a fitting end to the semester. This one is quite crazy, I know. This person took on the inspiration from the Chuck Close paintings that we looked at the very beginning, the first day of the semester. We looked at some paintings that were giant faces made out of tiny little fragments of color. And this person really went to town with that, as you can see. Again, not your average versions of these assignments. I'm showing you some of the truly incredible ones, but just to give you a full sense of what might be possible with the design. You do not have to know what you're doing ahead of time. You can start with a basic idea, start with really loose sketches, and together we will refine and develop and figure out what's possible for your pieces. Okay, so that is my introductory talk on it. We will, of course, be dialoguing a lot over email as you are working on your pieces.